Secondly, how do we know that what was written is actually still in the Bible today? That's the bigger question. Could it have been changed later on? Because we don't have the original manuscripts. So what manuscripts do we have? Well, we have the Bodmer Papyrus, which is in Switzerland, which is parts of the Gospel of John from the 2nd century. We have the John Rylands manuscripts, are right up here in Manchester, up north of us, which are also from the Gospel of John from the 2nd century. If you go across the waters over to Ireland, you have the Chester Beatty manuscripts in Dublin, which are all 4 Gospels plus Acts and Revelations from the 3rd century. And then, of course, right here, you also have the Sinaiticus. Isn't that beautiful? The entire New Testament, right there from the 4th century. That's 300 years before the Quran came into existence. We can reproduce the entire New Testament. But that's not all. We have about 230 manuscripts. 230 manuscripts of the New Testament alone, all predating the 6th century. Now, why is that important? Let's open up your pamphlet and let's just take a look at page 18. People say yes, but that doesn't mean that the entire everything is there from the 1st century on. The reason it wouldn't be from the 1st century on is because it's written in papyrus, and you saw how fragile papyrus was. It disintegrates within 100 years. But let's see if they're being consistent. Just take a look at that graph at the bottom there. Look at the secular manuscripts. We've been talking about Herodotus all day today, haven't we? The great historian, which we know about, in fact, tells us all about the Assyrian period, the Babylonians. Look what he wrote. He was writing in the 5th century BC. Look at the earliest copy we have for any of his writings. Not till 900 AD. That's 1,300 years later. We have nothing before 900 AD for Herodotus. Yet no one disputes Herodotus. Thucydides, also 5th century BC. We don't have anything from the 10th century AD. Plato, Aristotle, Caesar, from the 5th, 4th, 2nd century BC. We don't have anything before 900 AD for any of them. They don't even begin to appear until the 10th century. Coming down to Pliny, Suetonius, Tacitus, you're going to have Thallus, Phlegon, all these other historians from the time, about the same time the Bible was written, the 1st century. We don't have anything before 850 AD for any of them. The earliest we have is Pliny. Nothing before 850 AD. Nothing before the 9th century. Yet no one disputes any of these historians or these philosophers. So there's a double standard here. They only want to dispute the New Testament material. Yet we have over 230 manuscripts alone that predate the 6th century. And we can go right back to the 2nd century. Plus we have hundreds of more copies. What are we talking about? We have about 5,300 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, 10,000 Latin Vulgates. We got about 9,000 in other languages, which means if you add them up, we have about 24,000 manuscripts of the New Testament alone. Now, not all of them are early. The earliest ones are the 230 that I mentioned earlier that predate the 6th century. But that's many more. That's 230 more than the earliest secular manuscripts, which don't even come to existence until the 9th century. Can you see the problem here? There is a double standard. And what they're demanding of the Bible, they do not demand of any other piece of literature. So already you can see that our manuscript evidence is better than any other manuscript evidence, secular or sacred. Now, what else do we have? See, we don't just have manuscript evidence. We've got the translations. What are we talking about? Look on page 19. On page 19, we're going to redo this so it's a lot better to look at. But we have about 19,824 translations. Almost immediately from the very beginning when the New Testament was written, it was sent out across the diaspora and it was translated almost immediately into other languages. We have Coptic translations from the early 3rd and 4th century. We have Armenian translations from the 5th century, Gothic from the 4th century, Georgian from the 5th, Ethiopic translation from the 6th, Nubian from the 6th, and on and on and on. We have at least 19,000 translations in 11 different languages. 11 different languages. If we had wanted to corrupt it before the Quran came into existence, we have to go to every one of those 19,000 translations in all 11 languages, change every one of them without anybody knowing about it, and all of them being consistent. Now, what's a bigger miracle? Can you see what they're saying? On top of the manuscript evidence, just the fact that it's in so many different languages, and they all agree, is what's another important, shows that we could not, there's no way in the world we could have changed it, even if we wanted to change it. Thirdly, we also have the lectionaries. 2,135 lectionaries, written in the 6th century alone. These are the liturgy in the church, early church. They would recite scripture verbatim right out of the Bible, and they would be part of their liturgy in church. These are written on these lectionaries. They exist today. You can see them, over 2,135 of them that we can look at. They exactly corroborate the manuscript evidence that comes earlier. But I'm leaving the best to last. There's something better than the manuscript evidence, something better than the translations, than the lectionaries. What do you think that is? Absolutely. Good man. Give him an A. The early church fathers. The very beginning, when the gospel writings were being written, when they were being disseminated by around the churches at that time, immediately people were being converted into the church, but they were having problems with what the gospel writers were saying. Gnostics especially did not like the idea that God would take on bodily form. The monarchists and the Gnostics did not like the idea that God could die or that he could have a son. And so they started disputing these references in the Bible. And the early church fathers had to stand against those disputes. They had to confront them, but they did a very clever thing. Now, rather than just sit there and philosophically confront them, like I would do, or Russ would do, they decided to go back to Scripture. They decided to go right back to Scripture and just write letter after letter to dispute every one of these heresies, reciting Scripture verbatim right out of the text. And in those letters, then, they were quoting the New Testament. Now, two gentlemen here in Britain, Sir David Dalrymple and Dr. Jean Burgon, have spent their whole life going around the world and accumulating all these early church father quotations. They wanted to find out how many of these quotations they could come across. In the last century, they did this. And they came up with 86,000 quotations. 86,000 of these biblical quotations just from within these letters from the early church fathers. They wanted to go one step further. They wanted to find out how many of these 86,000 quotations predated the 4th century. That means came before the Sinaiticus, you saw it there. Came before this Council of Nicaea. Came before what many Muslims claim is when we created the Bible. So they just went back and they did what you see on page 20. Look at the top of page 20 there. They went back to these writers like Justin Martin. Justin Martin, they found 268. He was writing in the late 1st century. 268 quotations from the Gospels, 10 from the book of Acts, 43 in the Pauline epistles, 6 from the general epistles, 3 from the Revelations, 330 quotations in total they found in his writings. Irenaeus, again from the beginning of the 2nd century, 1,800 quotations. Clement of Alexandria, over 2,400 quotations. Look at Origen, almost 18,000 quotations that he found with Origen. Tertullian, over 7,000 quotations. Hippolytus, 1,300 quotations. Eusebius, over 5,000 quotations. Grand total, over 36,000 quotations they found before the 4th century.
Just based on the church fathers' quotations, how much of the New Testament?
That's my next thing. Hold on. You're jumping the gun. Dr. Jean Burgon asked that question. Dr. Jean Burgon wanted to know how much of the New Testament these included. Because as you can see, they include all different parts of the New Testament. So he put them in chronological order from Matthew all the way to Revelation. Just from the first 4 centuries. Guess what he found?
99%.
He could reproduce the entire New Testament except for 11 verses.
Wow.
Except for 11 insignificant verses. He could reproduce the entire New Testament, all 27 books, just from the quotations predating the 4th century. That is before the Sinaiticus, before the Alexandrinus, before the Vaticanus. You can still reproduce. And remember, this is outside the manuscript evidence. This is completely outside. It's a whole different genre of literature. Thank God he's preserved our Bible. Not just in one genre, but in 4 different genres. All of them corroborating one with the other. That's why I love it when they say we've corrupted our Bible. When Muslims tell me we've corrupted our Bible, I ask them 2 simple words. When and where. Tell me when.
Yeah, let's have that discussion.
Just tell me when. And I usually help them out. Did we corrupt them before the 7th century? Before the Quran? Before the time of Muhammad? Or after the 7th century? They always say before. Now, one of the things you can do real quickly with the Muslim is just say, where in the Quran does it say so? Go back to Surah 10, 94. Go back to Surah 21, Ayah 7, which says, O Muslims, go to those people of the book who have been given the scriptures before you. If you have any question, ask them, for they have been given the Tawrat and the Injil for you. Surah 29, Ayah 46. Do not dispute with the Christians. Oh, I love that one. That's a great one to use at Speaker's Corner. Don't dispute with the Christians, for they have been given the Tawrat and the Injil for you. Surah 4, Ayah 136. Muslims, go to those scriptures God has given to you from beforehand, the Tawrat and the Injil, the books of Moses, and the Gospel of Jesus Christ, for they are signs for you. Surah 5, Ayah 46 and 47. O Christians, go to those scriptures God has given you. Verse 68. For they are signs for you Christians. Nowhere does it say not to go to these books. There's not one reference at all in the Quran that even suggests that there's a corruption. And I've been asking this for 28 years. Muslims, show me one reference in the Quran that says we've corrupted our scriptures. There's none. Just the opposite. So then I say, well, then maybe we corrupted it after the 7th century. They just go back to Sinaiticus. Go to the Alexandrinus. That's 3 to 200 years before the Quran. Exactly the same Bible that we have today. But if you don't trust that, go to the lectionary. If you don't trust them, go to your church fathers and just look at it's enormous. 36,000 quotations, all before the 4th century. Every verse in the New Testament is set free. Great stuff, isn't it good?
Oh, that's incredible.
Don't ever apologize for the New Testament.